Uh, See, we did about 12 points last time. We'll continue with that. Now, he brings out another dimension of the very foundation of this concept of vibhutis. He says, what actually happens through this process? He tells us very clearly what actually happens through this process of revealing the divine manifestation, his divine manifestations in everything that is created. He says, the percussion and the delivering shock come by the touch of the divine on our actual nature, which directs the energy away from its normal, limited, separative action and objects towards the eternal, universal, and transcendent, orientates it towards the infinite and absolute Godhead. This
What's the
truth
page number, sir?
371. This truth of the dynamic omnipresence of the divine power of being is the foundation of the theory of the Vibhuti. See, the point to be noted is, once we are able to see the presence of this divinity in everything, in manifestation, then what happens is, actually, as he says, it delivers a shock. That means our normal, limited, separative action and objects no longer work in that mode. Our normal consciousness is limited, separative, and what he calls it as the non-recognition of the divinity. That is our normal consciousness. But once when you see this divine manifestation, there will be a kind of a transmutation, a fundamental transformation in us. And what happens? This energy is directed towards the eternal, universal, and transcendent. So you no longer see things in a limited manner, in a separative manner, and in a passing manner. See why? You see, if there is something, let us say, if there is something truly precious, we would not let it go, isn't it? We would not be letting go of it. So it becomes something very intimate to us and an integral part of us. And we recognize also that this is something permanent, this is something eternal. And the idea of a separation also vanishes. The idea of thinking that these are all separate, individuals are separate, all other beings are separate, everything, you see, that is the, unfortunately, the normal mental consciousness can function only at that level, because that is the process of evolution. In the process of evolution, we have come to a certain stage. But we shouldn't be stuck here. The whole point is, we are not supposed to be stuck at this level. We have to evolve further out of it. So that is the purpose of all these scriptures. The purpose of any scripture is to make you realize the universality of things and the transcendent nature of the divinity. So if that is not happening, it means we haven't understood this properly. If that is not happening, obviously it means that we have not seen the divinity. We may intellectually appreciate it, or we may think that yes, there is divinity in everybody, there is divinity in everything. As that statement I mentioned earlier also, see, the mind is so deceptive. It will say, see, I love humanity, but it is people who are a problem. It is a problem with people for me. You see the nature of this mind. Generally, yes, universally, I love humanity. But when it comes to my own kith and kin and relations and family and friends and neighbors and all, I have some problem or the other with everybody. That is precisely where we are unable to see this divinity, the presence of this divinity. And it orientates towards the infinite and absolute Godhead. Now your complete orientation, your face is now turned towards that infinite and absolute Godhead. That is a reorientation. And he makes a very pertinent point and says, this truth of the dynamic omnipresence of the divine power of being is the foundation of the theory of Vibhuti. The very basis of this chapter on Vibhuti Yoga, where the Lord reveals his own divinity in manifestation, is the foundation, is the basis for the realization of the dynamic omnipresence of the divine power. Because it is actually an energy. It is a very powerful energy. So that energy is what is acting. Therefore, it is dynamic, omnipresent. And it is the divine power in manifestation. And that is the basis of the whole of the creation. The infinite divine Shakti is present everywhere and secretly supports the lower formulation. Look at this again. See, the infinite divine Shakti, the divine power is present everywhere and secretly supports the lower formulation. Para prakritir me yaya dharyate jagat. But it holds itself back, hidden in the heart of each natural existence. Sarvabhutanam hruddeshe. It is there in the heart of every individual, and it supports the lower nature. The whole of manifestation, when you find the gross manifestation, obviously it is the lower nature part. There is this reference to the same lower nature in another part of the Bhagavad Gita. And how long does this continue? This continues until the veil of Yogamaya is rent by the light of knowledge. This veil has to be removed. You have to rend asunder this veil of Yogamaya. By what? By the light of knowledge. The spiritual being of man, the Jiva, possesses the divine nature. He is a manifestation of God in that nature. Para prakritir Jiva Bhuta. And he has latent in him all the divine energies and qualities. So this is the nature of it. When see a beautiful way of putting it is there in a different context. I was reading some other text where one conceptual clarity is given where Brahman in association with manifestation is Ishvara, or manifestation is Maya. Brahman in association with Maya operates as Ishvara. The Atman in association with Maya is Jiva. You are able to make out this difference? There it is that Brahman. Brahman is the cosmic energy. The very term Brahman means it is something infinitely vast. Bruhat, it comes from the root bruh, means vast, infinitely vast. It's that cosmic energy which is transcendental. That in association with Maya is Ishvara. And this Ishvara also, an interesting point is made, he is associated with Maya but not influenced by Maya. He has to come into being in the manifestation. He has to come into being in manifestation, and at the same time he is not influenced by Maya. Whereas when the Brahman becomes a microcosmic unit, we call that as the Atman. Essentially, there is no difference between Atman and Brahman. Like one interesting simile or example that is given is the Atman, or sometimes what we refer to as the monad, is an undetached spark of the divine flame. So, as a matter of understanding and comparison, if you consider the Brahman as a great effulgent flame, then the Atman is like a spark emerging out of that flame. The spark cannot have an independent existence of its own unless it is close to the flame. That means in some way there has to be a connection between this flame and the spark. That itself is what we call as proximity. See, where do we find the sparks? Around the flame. But you can't say that half a kilometer away the sparks of this flame will exist on their own. No, they can't. So this undetached spark of the divine flame is this Atman. That means this Atman is a microcosmic aspect which is influenced by Maya and becomes Jiva. Jiva has got this dual aspect. Jiva, you call him as a Jiva only when it is embodied and that Atmic principle is operating through it. The Atmic principle should operate through an embodiment. There should be a body. Whether it is gross or subtle or whatever it is, whatever nature of that's why we have sets of bodies and koshas. All that is in one way material only. It may be one may be subtler than the other. The causal may be very subtle as compared to the subtle body, and the subtle body may be invisible as far as the gross body is concerned. All that is only a matter of detail. But all this is in one way material only. So that aspect of it has to be understood now. The nature of Ishvara and Jiva. Ishvara is here for a purpose for the unfoldment of the divine plan. It is there for the unfoldment of the divine plan. So when that means he knows what the divine plan is. An entity which knows the divine plan obviously cannot be under the influence of Maya. It is only a functional limitation. It is only a functional limitation. But when it comes to the Jiva is both structurally and functionally limited on account of the microcosmic nature of the divinity in the form of Atman, which has actually become microcosmic because of the veil of Maya. If you remove the veil of Maya, the microcosm becomes the macrocosm. The Atman becomes the Brahman. What is preventing this? It is the veil of Maya. This is the veil of ignorance. So that is the important point. So he brings out another important dimension here. I have some chat here. Let me check the chat. Ramchandranji says, duality of the world is too strong, pulling us constantly down to earth, inhibiting from the realization of dynamic omnipresence of divinity. When you hear, you are fine. The moment out, again wailing. Yeah, that's a problem. And this has been persisting for lives. Several lives this has been persisting. You can't expect it to be removed so easily. No, because we have wrapped ourselves
in relate to mask to the veil.
Yeah. Yes. The mask, we are wearing the mask. And in fact, last time I told, in some other context, he uses this term mask. Sri Aurobindo uses the term mask. Now, the point he is trying to make is, I'll come to this important point. He says, but in this inferior Prakriti in which we live, the Jiva follows the principle of selection and finite determination, and there, whatever nexus of energy, whatever quality or spiritual principle he brings into birth with him, or brings forward as the seed of his self-expression, becomes an operative portion of his swabhava, his law of self-becoming, and determines his swadharma, his law of action. The very important point. Please understand this very carefully. He is calling swabhava as his law of self-becoming, and swadharma his law of action. Swabhava is something innate, something which is what we have brought forth through several births. And Swadharma is the law of action, therefore it needs an environment. If you remember what I mentioned about Swabhava and Swadharma, Swadharma is orientation, its orientation is towards action, and in order to perform action, you need an environment. So, if we do not understand the Swabhava and Swadharma, there will be a conflict always. There will always be a conflict. So one needs to understand what is one's Swabhava, and one needs to understand what is one's Swadharma also. So if we don't understand that, there will always be a conflict. You can't really help. You are in that conflict. So that is the whole problem. We have to understand this very clearly. Otherwise, what happens is we will be stuck. Okay. So I am trying to locate that slide which I have shown regarding Swabhava and Swadharma. that will become much more clearer. A recollection of that. Just hold on for 1 second. So in a yeah, I have located it. I will share that screen. Yeah, I hope you are able to see that. Is the screen visible, sir?
Yes, sir.
Yes, KKP. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. See, Swabhava is one's innate nature, endowments, qualities, latent talents, propensities, predilections, the core of one's individualized being evolved over many lives. Now compare that with what he is saying. The Jiva follows the principle of selection and finite determination, and there whatever nexus of energy, whatever quality or spiritual principle he brings into birth, becomes an operative portion of his swabhava, his law of self-becoming. So this is what you have evolved over several lives, and that has become your innate nature. Now, and this swabhava determines his swadharma or his law of action. Swadharma is related to and defined by the station or situation in life and limited by the external environment for expression, the field for the manifestation of one's swabhava within the limitations imposed by the law of karma. This is Swadharma. These two terms are clear now. Swabhava is innate nature and Swadharma is the environment for expression of the Swabhava within the limitation of karma. This is the fundamental principle to be understood very clearly. And this is what is emphasized by Sri Aurobindo. And we have to see that Swabhava and Swadharma have to be matched for deriving optimal advantage and benefits in our present life for our spiritual unfoldment, not for any other purpose. This matching of Swabhava and Swadharma, from an ignorance point of view also it will operate. But when you are operating through ignorance, you will always find there is a conflict. You're not happy with your environment. You're not happy with the conditions in which you are placed. You're not happy with the limitations that are imposed upon you. You want to do something totally different and the environment doesn't permit you to do it. Or the environment forces you to act in a certain manner which is not your swabhava. So anything that militates, rebels or revolts against one's swabhava and swadharma is paradharma, which retards all progress. And this retardation is whether worldly or spiritual progress, both are retarded. Because we are operating through ignorance. So that is the aspect of it to be recognized. Now, this is what he is emphasizing. This is what is being emphasized here by Sri Aurobindo, where you find that this inferior Prakriti is what is operating. And if that were all, there would be no perplexity or difficulty. The life of man would be a luminous unfolding of Godhead. If only this were to prevail. But he says, but this lower energy of our world is a nature of ignorance, of egoism, and of the three gunas. This is what is happening now. Along with our limitations, yes, Binaji, Swabhava and Swadharma also applies to worldly duties and innate abilities and our career, everything. But the conditioning on account of several factors of karma. If our karma is very strong in certain respects, you have to undergo it. Whatever you do, you cannot avoid it, and you have to undergo that. You have to undergo that.
So one question, sir.
Yes, please.
Yeah, regarding Swabhava and Swadharma, you have told that Swabhava is one's innate nature developed over through lives.
Yes.
And in conjunction with that, the Swadharma operates, and it says it will progress over a period of time.
Right.
But as compared to that, or in contrast to that, they say that in case you adopt Paradharma, you retards one's progress.
Yeah, obviously, whenever there is a conflict, that's what I said. Whenever there is a conflict between Swabhava and Swadharma, what you adopt is Paradharma. Whatever action
in one situation, let us assume that a person has developed a destructive innate nature. Swabhava is destructive in nature.
Right.
Now Paradharma says, okay, you like the Buddhas, do good, be practice non-violence and all that. Now suppose it adopts the Paradharma, how does that retard its one's progress? In fact, it is progressive, right?
First of all, he can't adopt his innate nature. You are making a wrong assumption. His innate nature, if it is violence, he cannot adopt non-violence. He will try to adopt non-violence, but every time he'll keep failing. You know, the force of his nature is such that if you are trying to adopt anything different from this, then it is going to create always a conflict, and you will be bound to fail in that. So that's why you need to overcome your nature. See, very interestingly, Jiddu Krishnamurti makes this point very clear. You have to understand that non-violence is a concept which the mind has created. It's not the truth. Non-violence is an ideal, isn't it? Non-violence is an ideal which I have projected in front of me, and I say that I am violent and I want to become non-violent. This wanting to become non-violent itself is violence, because you are not understanding what is. The present, the what is violence. If you completely understand this violence, completely, the whole structure, function, nature, everything of violence, if it is revealed to you through your attention, then it will drop automatically. You need not again try to become non-violent. It is the very understanding of violence which will lead to the dropping of that violence. If it is not leading to that dropping of violence, it means that I have not understood it. So that is why he was very critical about these ideals. Ideal of purity, ideal of non-violence, ideal of non-stealing, or ideal of something else or something else. They are all ideals. The very fact that you want to become non-violent is an indication that you are not, you are violent, isn't it? It is an indication that you are violent. Otherwise, why will you seek non-violence? If I am seeking something, it indicates that I don't have it.
So in effect, asuras, for example,
Yeah.
their innate nature being violent,
Yes.
For them, the Swadharma is to make progress in violence. Am I
Yeah.
right?
Yes, that is what happens also. And you can go up to a certain level, then somebody will put a check on it. See, in the Ramayana, Ravana very clearly tells Sita. He says, it is the Swadharma of Rakshasas to kidnap women, to forcibly marry them, to take away whatever they want. Simply, if I want something, I'll pick it up. That's all. Irrespective of the consequences and whether it belongs to me or not. I do not follow any dharma or any social norms or rules or regulations or anything. They don't apply to me. Very clearly, he says that in the Ramayana. He says, I am a Rakshasa and my Swadharma is to kidnap. So I have not done anything wrong. But in the eyes of the world as a whole, and in the eyes of a civilized society, that is a crime. So you have to check that crime. Somebody has to check that crime. So this will not go. You know the point. Before he kidnapped Sita, he had kidnapped thousands and thousands of women. Wherever he had gone and fought a war, he simply kidnapped whomsoever he thought fit or whomsoever he wanted. He simply kidnapped and brought them to Lanka and put them there. In the Ramayana, there is a beautiful description of all these women from all regions, of all colors and shades and beauty and whatnot, wealth and everything. He has simply done that earlier, but it has come to a peak now. He did something which he should not have done. He thinking that he can get away with this, he did it. And there is another interesting thing, there is a very beautiful story which was subsequently developed, not in the Valmiki Ramayana, but in some other Ramayanas. We have several Ramayanas. Everybody of some devotional this thing had written a Ramayana. In one of the Ramayanas, Kumbhakarna, his brother asks, you have kidnapped Sita, fine. But why did you go in the form of a sannyasi or a beggar and kidnapped her? You could as well have simply assumed the form of Rama, and she would have, in her ignorance, she would have followed you and you could have brought her here. Then very interestingly, Ravana says, I tried that also, but the moment I assumed the form of Rama, the very thought of kidnapping was gone away from my mind. There was no thought about kidnapping. That is the beauty of Rama. That is why Rama is called Ramo Vigrahavan Dharmaha. He is the personification of Rama, the personification of Dharma. So the very thought of Rama, even in the physical form, is so powerful that it will not allow you to dwell upon evil. You see the beauty of it. When he says, you are bloody fool, why did you go in that form and then kidnap her and then have all these problems? You could have simply assumed the form of Rama. He said, yes, I tried that. But the moment I assumed the form of Rama, I became a personification of Dharma. The very idea of revenge or kidnapping or harming somebody, all that has left me. So I was forced to assume that of a mendicant and go there for begging and create the situation for kidnapping Sita.
Understood,
So this is the beauty of it.
Then in the bigger picture,
yeah,
I think as you rightly said earlier, that evil is self-limiting.
Yeah, evil is self-limiting.
So ultimately the good wins.
Yes. But sometimes we may feel that a long run is being given for bad to prevail or evil to prevail.
Yes, yes, yes.
But that you have to understand the beauty of it, because this long run has come because of our own karma.
Our own karma. True, very true.
You have to undergo this. Therefore, you are in this situation.
Yeah, collective karma also.
Otherwise, it would not affect you, and you would be somewhere else. Why is somebody born in a particular country, in a particular time, at a particular place, and all that is because of the karmic link.
This Swadharma acting is also having its consequences, karma, consequence.
Obviously, that's what he said there, that. But this lower energy of our world is a nature of ignorance, of egoism, of the three gunas. Here, all the three factors are there. Fundamentally, ignorance. What does ignorance lead to? Ignorance leads to ahankara. Avidya leads to ahankara. It assumes the role of the doer, the enjoyer, the seer, the knower. It assumes that role and says, I am the seer, I am the knower, I am the doer, I am the enjoyer. That is ahankara, the egoism he talks about. And thirdly, what happens? It leads to being entangled in the three gunas, because the manifestation is on account of the three gunas.
Yesterday, I was led to read verse 15 of chapter 5.
Okay.
Where it talks about, how the absolute is not concerned with the evil in the world. Maya covers the total wisdom.
Yeah.
That is very much relevant to this discussion what we are having.
Obviously, see, it doesn't fit into that scheme of things. So the whole point to be understood is, and as I mentioned last time, our universal conception that is given of the whole of the manifestation and the transcendent, evil has a relevant place in it. Evil has a relevant place in it. In fact, in our present condition of ignorance, evil is more relevant than good. You just imagine, see, if it's all right sitting here and discussing is all right. Suppose we are on the street and somebody attacks us. Something wrong happens to us. Look at our own what we call as reaction. Do we think of divinity? Do we think of the divinity operating through that man and then operating in such a fashion that my karma is exhausted? That will happen only if the other fellow is very powerful. If the other fellow is very powerful and we can't do anything, then we will blame our own karma. But if we are equally powerful or in that moment, we would also react in a manner which is cruel. So that is the reason why when we talk about purification and all that, it refers to undergoing evil or undergoing the consequences of dukkha, of sorrow, without the thought of revenge. Yesterday, we were discussing Viveka Chudamani in some other context. There is one in the Shat Sampatti, there is this qualification called as, or accomplishment called as Titiksha, which is generally translated as endurance or patience and things like that. Adi Shankara very clearly says there are two aspects to what you call as patience or Titiksha. One is undergoing dukkha without any thought of revenge, apratikara purvakam. And the second one, he says, Chinta vilaparahitam. There should not be any thought of revenge, and you should not worry and weep over it also. Generally, what happens if I can't take any revenge? It will be always operating in my mind. Why did this happen to me? How did this happen to me? How can I take a revenge? And if I can't take a revenge, it keeps on causing tremendous amount of worry for me and anxiety. And then I'll also be lamenting that why did it happen to me? Why should it have happened to me? What is it that I have done? So both these things, when they are absent, then only it is called as endurance or patience or confidence or whatever you call it as. But that's not the nature. Either we take revenge or we lament over it and worry over it and become anxious over it and then let out that energy in some other form. As Janaki Ramji rightly said, the divine or the transcendent aspect of it, he says, I do not take on the sin or the merit of anybody. Verse number 15 of the chapter 5 says, Nadatte kasyatit papam nachaiva sukrutam vibhuhu. I am not involved in this process at all. And he says, Ajnanena vrutam jnanam tena muhyanti jantavaha. Jnana is veiled by ajnana. Wisdom is enveloped by ignorance. Thereby creatures are bewildered. They are confused. They are in moha, delusion. That is the problem. So you see, this has to be clearly understood as to what is our swabhava, what is the swadharma, and that we are operating at this lower level through these three things: ignorance, egoism, and the play of the three gunas. So what do we do? What does such a person do? He says he attempts to possess the world by strife and not by unity and harmony. He stresses an egocentric discord. That's our normal way of functioning. We are trying to possess the world through strife and not by unity and harmony. So he stresses an egocentric discord. When this ego is there, obviously there will be discord. This is the nature of ignorance. And with a very large possibility of deviation from dharma. This confused and striving self-expression takes various forms of incapacity, perversion, or partial self-finding. What happens when you're operating through ignorance, egoism, and with the influence of the three gunas? This is a confused and striving self-expression, taking various forms of incapacity, perversion, or partial self-finding. Dominated by the guna of tamas, the mode of darkness and inertia, the power of being works in a weak confusion, a prevailing incapacity, an unaspiring subjection to the blind mechanisms of the force of the ignorance. Dominated by the guna of rajas, the mode of action, desire and possession, there is a struggle. There is an effort there is a growth of power and capacity, but it is stumbling, painful, vehement, misled by wrong notions, methods, and ideals, impelled to a misuse, corruption, and perversion of right notions, methods, or ideals, and prone especially to a great, often an enormous exaggeration of the ego. You just observe. Let us observe ourselves and the people around us. All these things we find. There is an enormous exaggeration of the ego. A small pinching or a small prick will lead to an explosion because you have pricked your ego. The moment somebody pricks your ego, there's a big explosion because I have an exaggerated notion about myself. And what am I doing? Stumbling, painful, vehement, misled by wrong notions, methods, and ideals, impelled to a misuse, corruption and perversion of right notions, methods, or ideals. All these things happen. Very beautifully, Jiddu Krishnamurti used to put it in a very simple fashion and say, whatever the mind touches, it corrupts. Whatever the mind touches, it will corrupt. Because its nature is such. Its nature is such that it is bound to create corruption. That means corrupting means it will destroy the purity of the whole perception. And that's where we get stuck. And dominated by the guna of sattva, the mode of light and poise and peace, there is a more harmonious action, a right dealing with the nature, but right only within the limits of an individual light and capacity, unable to exceed the better forms of this lower mental will and knowledge. Even sattva is a problem. Sattva in itself may be good, but still it has that limiting factor. That is why the transcendent is called as Trigunatita. Only when you go beyond all the Trigunas, then you will be able to see the beauty of it. Otherwise, you are stuck in these Trigunas. And as I mentioned earlier, the gunas in their pristine form are not found in manifestation at all. It is only a domination of one of the three gunas at any given point of time. So if sattva is dominating, there could be peace and poise, more harmonious action, a right dealing with nature. But he puts a condition and says, right only within the limits of an individual light and capacity. Within our own perception, limited to that, and a capacity unable to exceed the better forms of this lower mental will and knowledge. To escape from this tangle, to rise beyond the ignorance, the ego and the gunas is the first real step towards divine perfection. Now you see why it is difficult, Ramchandranji, when you asked why it is so difficult and all, because you have to have the tremendous energy built in you to come to that escape velocity. You have to leave this gravitational field. Unless you leave this gravitational field here for us, is the three factors: the ego, the ignorance, ego, and the operations of the three gunas. So if you are operating within this field, you may be good, but that good is only relative and temporary and situational, contingent approach to the whole thing. Because at that point of time, sattva is dominating. And he has already told us what happens when rajas is dominating or tamas is dominating. He has already made it. So by that transcendence, the jiva finds his own divine nature and his true existence. Unless this happens, you will not find that divine nature and the true existence of the divinity through this process, through us. So you have to, as he says, to escape from this tangle, to rise beyond the ignorance, the ego, and the gunas is the first real step towards divine perfection. So the whole, as I said, the entire being, the whole direction, energy, orientation of an individual sadhaka should be to overcome this. Ignorance, ego, and the three gunas. Then only we'll come to it. Otherwise, it's not possible.
Sir, one question.
Yeah. Yes, please.
This avidya could be somehow overcome proper knowledge, acquiring proper knowledge. How about trying to go beyond the three gunas and also to achieve ahankara freeness?
No, sir. You are thinking that they are three different aspects.
Aha.
They are not actually three different. You see, they are, ignorance has given rise to ahankara.
Okay.
Ahankara has given rise to being stuck in this manifested world. And the nature of the manifested world is through the operation of the three gunas.
But without ahankara, the three gunas will not flourish at all, right?
No, they won't. They can't.
Hmm.
See, if there is no sense of self, what will operate on you?
Yes.
So they are not, see, for the purpose of discussion and analysis and conceptual clarity from a mental point of view, these three aspects are identified.
Okay.
But the aspect is, see, what happens to is, in the Yoga Shastra, these are called as kleshas. And a beautiful theory of that kleshas is developed, a beautiful system of that kleshas is developed, where avidya is the primordial ignorance. Avidya is the fundamental, in one way you can call it as the starting point of all manifestation. Avidya leads to asmita. Avidya leads to asmita. Asmita is me and mine. The sense of I, me, mine is asmita. And asmita leads to raga and dvesha. Raga and dvesha is attachment and hatred, liking and disliking. We see. You see, suppose I have a tremendous problem with my son. So what I say, if he is okay and behaving in a manner which is conducive to my own mental makeup and my own thinking and my own value systems and all, I'll have attachment towards him. The moment he opposes me, I'll convert this raga into dvesha. I'll say, you are not my son at all. Get lost. The same person. Why did this happen? Because of this sense of I, me, and mine. Then what happens? It doesn't stop there. We want to hold on to whatever we have, to our body, to our property, to our things, to our ideas, to our knowledge. That is what is called as abhinivesha. Clinging to life, clinging to the known. Because this I doesn't want to lose its own identity. If I lose my own identity, what is there? I may think I'll be totally lost. And I don't know what it is. It's totally unknown to me. So I'll hold on to the known. Whatever it is, sir, it is better, right? Now, this can extend to any level. Sir, I was born and brought up here, sir, in Bangalore, in this particular area only. And this is known. I'm more or less very comfortable here for the time being. I may have some problems or difficulties, but it's better within the known. I have this wife or husband, sir, with whom I have been living for 30, 40 years or whatever it is. So it is better to have as the English saying goes, a known devil is better than an unknown angel. So you cling on to whatever you know. That is the abhinivesha. So the same thing, you see, don't look at these as three different aspects, sir. They are different and unconnected things. They are all in the sequential, this thing as one aspect only. If you transcend avidya, you will be transcending ahankara and gunas also. If you transcend gunas, you will be transcending ahankara and avidya. Everything, see, it's all connected. One single identity is what we have created, isn't it?
Got it, sir. Got it. Thank you.
Right? Okay. So that is the point. And he goes on to another saying, and the liberated vision sees three things at once as the whole occult truth of the natural being. First and foremost, it sees the divine Prakriti in all, secret, present, waiting for evolution. Three things he said. What will happen? The liberated vision sees three things at once, not separately. For our explanation purpose, he is saying, what is the first thing? That the whole occult truth of the natural being. That is, it says the divine Prakriti in all. Whether it is secret or present or waiting for evolution or whatever it is, it sees the divine Prakriti in all. Secondly, the differences of the apparent action in Deva and Rakshasa, man and beast and bird and reptile, good and wicked, ignorant and learned, but as action of divine quality and energy under these conditions, under these masks. How did he know about COVID in 1920s or 30s? I don't know. But he has used the term mask, with which we are now very familiar. And we can't go out without that. He says, it is not deluded by the mask, but detects behind every mask the Godhead. This is the second aspect. All differences are apparent. Whether it is Deva, Rakshasa, Manushya, or whatever it is, all these are apparent. Finally, the liberated eye does not lay undue stress on the perversion and imperfection. Please mark these words very carefully. Please mark it very carefully. The liberated eye does not lay undue stress on the perversion and imperfection, but is able to see all with a complete love and charity in the heart, a complete understanding in the intelligence, a complete equality in the spirit. Finally, it sees the upward surge of the striving powers of the will to be towards Godhead. So all these three things you will be able to see. Divine Prakriti in all, and all differences are apparent, and the differences do not delude that person. And thirdly, that liberated eye will not lay undue stress on perversion and imperfection. Now you see, evil does not really affect such a person.
So this is the solution to get escape velocity?
Yeah, you see, again, sir, Ramchandranji, I have earlier also requested you, see, don't be in a hurry to go somewhere. You understand my point, sir? See, don't be in a hurry to go anywhere. You can't go anywhere. Wherever you go, you take your being along with you, isn't it?
Very true.
So why are you concerned about the escape velocity now? It is something to be attained. I am giving you as an example about this escape velocity in the sense that you have to go beyond it. But unless you completely understand what is the present, what exactly our whole constitution is, our whole mind is, how it can play infinite number of games, wherein we stress upon certain things, we don't stress upon certain things. See, when there is something wrong in me, I justify it. When there is something wrong in somebody, I'll be very critical and condemning that person. I'll say that, no, I am also okay, sir, I have a problem, but my problem is limited. Sir. Not like that fellow, sir. That politician is he's a big crook, sir. See, there is only some qualitative difference in certain things. The manifestation of evil is our responsibility. Because of our behavior, there is manifestation of evil. We are a part of this whole nonsense. A liberated person is not connected with this any longer. That is the idea. That means he's detached from it. He does not lay undue stress or importance to evil or perversion or imperfection. And he is able to see the divinity in everything. And he is able to see beyond the mask also. Apparent differences also do not make any difference to him. The first thing, sir, first aspect of any spiritual sadhana should be to very critically and comprehensively examine oneself. That is what is Swadhyaya or self-knowledge, is to very deeply, very comprehensively look at one's own nature, look at one's own behavior, look at one's own attitude. There will be a great revelation. We are not interested in that. We don't want to do it because the moment we start doing that, it becomes very inconvenient.
That's correct.
The mind will come in between and try to justify or dilute the whole seriousness of it. So that is what is important, sir. Sadhana, unfortunately, has been twisted into so many practices and methods and systems and things like that. But that is not sadhana at all. It starts here and now by looking into oneself. Nothing more than that. That is why it should be effortless. That's why it should be effortless. The moment you put effort, you are changing the direction of things, changing the direction of our own thoughts, changing the direction of our own feelings and emotions and things like that. And you are trying to project something which is non-existent. You are projecting ideals. I am impure, therefore I should become pure. I am violent, therefore I should become non-violent. I am greedy, therefore I should become non-greedy. The thinking of non-greedy, becoming non-greedy, you can't become like that. You have to understand the nature of greed. You have to understand the nature of violence. You have to understand the nature of lust. You have to understand the nature of anger here, completely, comprehensively. Therefore, all these aspects of sadhana, if you try to externalize it, then we are lost. If we try to externalize sadhana, then we are lost. And all these things come in that category only. Whether you call it as meditation, you call it as pranayama, you call it as yoga, you call it as something else and something else. Any external, if you make this sadhana externalized, you have already lost it. Already lost it. It's a process of internalizing the whole thing and having a tremendous clarity at looking at oneself. Then it will reveal so many things about oneself which one was not aware. Krishnamurti or Jiddu Krishnamurti used to also condemn about, condemn in the sense he would not agree to something called as conscious, subconscious, unconscious and that. He said, the moment you are tremendously conscious, then the subconscious also comes into the conscious. The unconscious also emerges into the conscious. The moment you are going deeper and deeper and deeper, and then that clarity is there, so there won't be anything like subconscious and unconscious. Because you have given partial attention to something and you are giving priority or overimportance to something, that only operates in the conscious. The others don't operate. But if that is the reason why he says, you don't lay undue stress on good or bad. Perversion or as he calls as imperfection or whatever it is, you don't need to lay undue stress on that. So everything will come to the surface. The moment you start going deeper and deeper and deeper, everything will surface out. I mentioned this earlier also, the great saints and sages, the Vaggayataras and all lamenting that evil is not leaving them, evil is not leaving them. then I can't take recourse to that and see, sir, he's a great saint. He himself is saying evil is not going away. Then I am also equal. So I am also equal. We are not, both of us are not equal. For me, my whole fabric is black. My whole fabric is black. It is imbued with evil. But for him, his whole fabric is white with a small dot of black, or of something which is black. So that small dot of black on a huge canvas which is totally white, that appears prominent. And there, the question of grace, the question of kripa, the question of the divine operating through us comes into being, where unless that is there, this can't go away. So when a great saint is saying that, sir, evil is not leaving me, cruelty is not leaving me, it means that that residue, that small invisible remnant, a residue of it is there, which that means he is in this last stages of struggling to get out of it or realize that this is not leaving me, is what his lamentation is about. I can't equate myself to and say that, sir, he is also having problems and I am also having problems. But the dimension and the nature of his problem is totally different. Whereas I am totally into the darkness. So the subtlety of all these things have to be understood very carefully. Otherwise, what happens is we are likely to be misled by the whole thing. Okay. So only when that happens, only when these three things he says, which I have mentioned earlier, then only he says it respects, welcomes, encourages all high manifestations of energy and quality, the flaming tongues of the divinity. This is very poetically he puts it. The flaming tongues of the divinity, the mounting greatness of soul and mind and life in their intensities, uplifted from the levels of the lower nature towards heights of luminous wisdom and knowledge, mighty power, strength, capacity, courage, heroism, benignant sweetness and ardor and grandeur of love, and self-giving, preeminent virtue, noble action, captivating beauty, and harmony, fine and godlike creation. All such qualities you are talking about, they will start manifesting. Because it is an infinite repository of that. It's an infinite repository of that. So that's why he has used such beautiful poetic way of expression. So that is the beauty of it. The divine manifestation, the reason for the divine manifestation, if it is understood, then it will give the right kind of impetus. It will give the right kind of impetus to overcome this. I think it's 11:42. We started at about 10:35 or so. We can stop here, and hopefully by another 2-3 pages is there. Yeah, another 2 pages only. We can cover it in the next session. He talks about the Sat, Chit and Ananda aspects of it, and how the Gita puts the things in their right place and perspective and other things. We'll come to that. But it is important to know these things. See, the point is, a mere superficial reading of it, or enjoying it, or thinking that I have understood it, is not adequate and sufficient. One has
the next revision of Gita,
yeah,
in chapter 10 it will come. I am seen in the school of ancient wisdom people.
Yes, yes. No, that would be easy, Janakiramji. It would be easy to see in the people in the school of ancient wisdom. But can you see that in the assembly and in the cabinet? Can you see that in your arch rival or your enemy or somebody whom you don't like? That is more important. School of ancient wisdom.
My name has helped me.
Yeah.
My name has helped mean that.
Yes. And see, the things become very apparent, sir. Luckily, my wife is not here. See, she's somewhere in the kitchen. See, point is what I'm saying is, she would know. She would say, yeah. Your behavior is excellent in the school of ancient wisdom, but they don't know how you behave at home. So that is where it has to start. We'll all be good to each other in the school of ancient wisdom, greeting each other and thanking each other and feeling good about it and all that. But that's not enough. That's why we need not give so much of importance to that evil or imperfection or perversion or whatever it is. But at the same time, we should be able to see the divinity there also. See the divinity in that respect also we should be able to see. That's the whole point. Then what happens is then the manifestation of divinity in the whole of creation is that gives you a clarity of vision. But as he says, unless you transcend this avidya, transcend this primordial ignorance and the consequences of that primordial ignorance, which is the sense of egoism or the sense of I, and the play of the intertwining play of all these gunas. Gunaha guneshu vartante, he says in the Bhagavad Gita. He says they once you have pressed the trigger, the gunas will play on their own. You need not do anything more now. You have to only release them. You release them, and it will take care of it. That's what it is. Okay, sir. So we can close the session.
Thank you, Krishnapani. We'll see you on Sunday, 10 o'clock. We'll see everybody on Sunday, 10 o'clock. I think Sajini is here.
Yes.
Sajini, can you do the closing, please?
And any announcements to be made?
Yeah.
Sajini ji is
she there? Sajini, are you there?
She is there, but I don't know whether
all right,
she is listening to us or not. So thank you, everybody. If you want, I'll close the
yes, please.
Thing with Loka Samastha.
Thank you, Krishnapani ji. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you again Sunday.
Om Swasti Prajabhyah Paripalayantam Nyayena Margena Mahim Mahishaha Gobrahmanebhyah Shubhamastu Nityam Loka Samastha Sukhino Bhavantu Loka Samastha Sukhino Bhavantu Loka Samastha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Om Tat Sat Brahmarpanamastu. Shri Krishnarpanamastu. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishnapani ji. Just a reminder that we meet at 10 o'clock on Sunday.
Yes. Sunday it is 10 o'clock. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.